The next panel has an easy name. It's investing. And it has a great moderator, Klaus Hommels, who is regarding to one of the best universities of Europe from Fontainebleau Business Universities. Fontainebleau in St. Gallen was nominated as Best European Investor. Klaus, the floor is open. It's your panel.
Thank you, So, in assembling this panel, I have basically two ideas which I want to run through. The first is I would like to elaborate a little bit on the European VC landscape. And secondly, I would like to discuss a little bit new investment styles that I have observed. So the first is the European VC ecosystem. I have already several times stated that and it occupies me a lot. I think, unfortunately, in Europe, we destroy more market cap through the internet than we create. And that is a very serious topic. What do I mean with that? I think we are structurally disadvantaged and maneuvered ourselves into that structural disadvantage. What I mean by that is, if you look at the landscape, only those companies really matter that are either category killers or that are very heavy infrastructure companies, like a Google. If you want to build a company, you rely on them, like a Facebook. So these companies, America has them. Funny enough, if you go to Russia, Russia has them. They have a Yandex, they have a vKontakte. If you go to China, China has them. China has a Baidu, China has a Tencent, China has a Taobao. So when I look at the scenery and compare the different areas, the US, China, and Russia have succeeded in securing these really structural companies. And we don't have that here. So for me, that implies several consequences. First consequence is we don't have the innovation leaders here. And secondly, these kind of businesses always absorb startups. So taking care a little bit of the exit environment. So the second thing I would like to address is different investment styles. I have looked at the different styles that have come up, and there are these evergreen structures like the Nespers and the DSTs. Then you have the classical model of a VC world. And then I have observed that more and more very seasoned entrepreneurs build their little fortresses, and they assemble different companies and build it into one structure. So this, to support and to elaborate on these hypotheses, I'm totally proud that we could assemble a group of individuals here that each stand for one of the real innovations that happened. So I'd like to start with Alexander Tamas from DST, famous through the Facebook and Zynga investment. Secondly, I'm proud to have Hein Pretorius here from Nespers and Chris Oram from Horizons. Furthermore, I have Dharmash Mistry from Balderton and David Liu from Jefferies, one of the guys that I appreciate very lot of his insights. Harish, a friend of mine from Israel, who is one of the most visible entrepreneurs. And last but not least, Tomorrow Focus CEO Stefan Winners, who, to my perception, is one of the early guys that embraced buying companies, startups, and bringing them into the next stage of development. And I would like to, with you, Stefan, to start and and talk a little bit about your view. Do you see the ecosystem in Europe the way I describe it, or did I smoke dope?
I don't think that you smoked dope. I mean...
Thanks. I only wanted to hear that.
I think we have a structural break in the system, and there's something before, and that is globally. And then I would talk about Europe. We definitely had a structural break after Lehman. So if we look at the moment on the global side, data which is available from Dow Industries, we see drop by 50% in money giving into VC companies. That's on the global scale. On the other hand, and that's the reason why I'm very happy to sit here, is that we see that there are so many good companies out there in Europe. And even if I see your point that we have two companies like Google and Facebook who have a global power, but also have, what can I say, that there's a risk of monopoly game. I see at the moment in Europe a lots of chances, a lots of companies. Klaus, I'll give you one example. The companies we have seen last year in 2009, and seeing means reading, getting a paper, talking to them between 90 minutes and 4 hours, has went up 4 times. Because VC money in the seed section is just, from my feeling, gone. VCs who still have the funds invest into second stage, third stage companies who are really growing very rapidly and are continuing to grow rapidly, especially in the e-commerce field. So we saw it as a chance to talk to young entrepreneurs, to talk to them, to being very surprised that the evaluations we saw after Lehman were very reasonable, very good investment opportunities. So from my point of view, I see your point. Yes, there is a global challenge we have, that there are 2 5,000-pound gorillas, not 1,000, not 800, but 5,000, with Google and Facebook. And as you said, there are similar things in China, which is not an open market, and in Russia, which has its own problems. But because the companies we have are still growing so much, I don't see, at the moment, I see more chances and opportunities rather than risk. We have to discuss with Google and Facebook how to proceed. But overall, it's very positive for me.
Okay, great. This was the inside-out view. And now I'd like to continue with the outside-in view, David. How do you compare the infrastructure of the ecosystem in the US, or also you have a lot of exposure to China and in Europe?
Yeah, it's, I spent a lot of time in Europe and also in China and in the US, so it's interesting to see the contrast. You know, as we think about where we spend our time, you know, we ultimately follow the money, but as a precursor to following money, we look at the traffic. And a couple interesting data points. If you look at the top 10 publicly traded internet companies in the US domiciled, and you compare them against the top 10 European domiciled internet companies, the market cap ratio is about 30 or 40 to 1. So if you take the market cap of the top 10 US players, you're hovering somewhere between 350 to 400 billion. In the European market, European domiciled, you're somewhere between 10 to 15 billion. And we step back and we ask ourselves, why is that the case? Now, one of the key reasons is if you look at global traffic, if you look at the top 25 in the ComScore 25, there's not a single European domiciled company on that list. 90% of the traffic is US domiciled companies serving traffic around the world. And then the remaining 10% is China domiciled companies serving the rest of the world. You really need to go down to the ComScore 30 or 35 before you see the first European company hit the list. And so I think one of the challenges as we look at the market and we think about where one can make money, we step back and we try to understand why is that the case? Why is the market cap ratio so much lower in European domicile? And as we've been exposed and worked with companies in this part of the world, like a Daily Motion, like a Ocado or a Moneybookers, all very successful companies, I think one of the challenges is that this is really a market with many fragmented markets. The addressable market is not that easy for an indigenous European internet company to attack. So even from a very high level, it appears that the population is bigger than the US, the addressable dollars are bigger than the US. There's so many hurdles to actually accessing the entire addressable market in European theater. And I think the US obviously doesn't have that issue, and China doesn't have that issue. And so I think you've seen much more fluidity, much more rapid return, much more market cap expansion in those parts of the world than you do see here.
Great, thanks for your view. I love DST and how they do it. So, because I think they have invented a new model of VC, and that's the first time I've seen something different, saying, I go for the global big shots. I'm, pardon if I say that, a little bit unsensitive on pricing, maybe, yeah? And then if I decide that, then I want to get as much as possible out of it. So, and that's why I'm very proud to have you here. And with Mail.ru, vKontakte, you basically shaped the Russian internet somehow. Tell us a little bit about your investment strategy and also the way how you see the structural discrepancies in the different markets.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of investment strategy, there was really one missing piece. It was kind of entrepreneurs that have built interesting companies, and there is real value in those companies. And then, many of them have seen in the past those companies actually go down and burn, and so they want to get some liquidity, and they want to make sure that, they can buy a house or send the kids to college or do some of those things. At the same time, many of them don't necessarily really want to sell the company, and many of them know it's too early to take a company public when it's in an extremely high growth phase. And so what we at DST are doing, or what we've done with Facebook and with Zynga, was to go in and say, look, if the only reason why you want to go public is to provide liquidity to our employees, that's not a good reason. What you should do is think about, is there a real profound business reason why you would like to do it? And the answer for Facebook was that they wanted to run as a private company for a bit longer, and the same for Zynga. And so what we did was to come in and said, okay, well, we offer a tender offer to the employees, structured together with a company to provide them with liquidity. And if you want to strengthen your balance sheet, you can also raise it in a private kind of context. So what that allows is for people to actually go and build these companies, right? So many people forget if you sell the company, that's kind of like the end of it. No? So it will be forgotten in a few years. If you take it public too early, you put a huge amount of burden onto the company, and it may actually not perform as well as it could have. And so that's really the idea behind Facebook, behind Zynga. And I think exactly like Klaus said, we don't believe much in diversification. We don't believe in this model of invest in 30 companies and pray that one of them will actually make it. So I think if you find a company that really has the power to become a multi-hundred-billion-dollar company, even what we believe can be the case with Facebook, then get in there and don't minimize for the downside, but maximize for the upside. So we've been very active in the market in increasing the position. We'll be doing that with Zynga as well. And I think you find these companies and you grow them. And that's the same thing that we've done in Russia, where we have some leading assets, and over time we just accumulated more because we have more information about these companies. We see how well they're performing. And so for us, it didn't make much sense to actually go and start investing in other smaller companies. In terms of the point of the structure here in Europe, I think one thing that drew us to Facebook, one thing that drew us to Zynga as well, were the CEOs and the founders. They had the kind of vision and the drive to really go out and build this company. And when you meet Mark Zuckerberg, he's somebody who's really not focused on the monetary aspect of it. He could have sold a company 20 times over, and he wants to go build it. We have yet to find companies that have the similar kind of quality here in Europe. There are a few private ones, but most of them really start with our exit strategy before they even start the company. And it's a sad thing. No? You can't build a company if you always have in mind, well, I want to get rich. Because what happens is the first paycheck comes along, and everybody sells for the first $100 million. And I hear the point around, in the US, they have the English language, and you can go international. But you look in Japan, there are 6 companies that have more than $1 billion in market cap. In China, there are 12. In the US, there are 25. In Europe, there are 0, right? And in Russia, we're building these companies that are each worth more than $1 billion. But here in Europe, the first paycheck comes and people sell out. And I think before the mindset changes here of founders that really want to go for it and really want to build a business, I don't think you'll see a big structural shift here. I think you will find good exits. I think you will find some good returns, but I don't think you'll find real massive giants in the European internet scene.
Great assessment. Chris, my co-investor in Facebook and Spotify. So Chris comes from a Hong Kong-based family office, which is a truly global investor. And tell us a little bit about your views on China's structure versus European structure.
I think for China, a lot of the companies there are very aggressive, and they build towards a need. So they look at, it's driven by the mass market. It's very entertainment focused, and they really try and address the need of the consumer. And sorry, excuse me. Yeah. I think what's different there is that they are able to innovate very quickly. They have large engineering labs that are able to work on things, and it's very much a sort of tweak and innovate model. So what will happen is they'll start off with an idea, and they will experiment, and really you have the ability to scale quickly because of the amount of internet users in China. It's increasing at the rate of 25% plus. We now have 385 million internet users, of which there are 235 mobile internet users. And I think that for people who haven't grown up with the internet or haven't grown up with certain technologies, there's been this leap to mobile and to the internet.
So, I mean, to give you an idea of size, yeah, the Youku or Victor Ko's YouTube alike in China has 60 million uniques a month. How much does Tom.com have?
Tom.com does, I think, 30 or 40 million. I think,
yeah. So Hein represents Naspers in Central Europe. Yes, Naspers, hardly known. He always tries to have low profile, but I have to lift this low profile a little bit. Naspers is a 10 billion market cap South African company that is probably one of the most successful investors, and that given the case that they had a very diverse geographical approach. So not only are they in Mail.au, but they're also in Tencent in China. So they consistently picked the winners in different countries, which I always admire. So can you tell me a little bit about your experiences in China? You've lived there, and in Russia, and in the comparison to continental Europe.
Yeah, I mean, from a Naspers MIH perspective, we really focus on emerging markets. If you look at our portfolio, we don't really have anything in developed markets. And a big reason for that is what Alexander was saying, which is also why we're such great co-partners, because we have the same philosophy. We focus mainly on emerging markets, and a big part of our investment strategy is buying a team. So we've been on the internet space for the last 11, 12 years. And touch wood, we haven't lost a founding team yet. And that's what we invest in. We invest in talent, because finding companies is an easy job to do. Finding people who are willing to build those companies for a strategic investor like ourselves is not that easy to do. So from a continental Europe perspective, which is not a market we focus on, I would agree with Alexander. It's an exit check. So if I get a proposal and the first thing about the entrepreneur tells me he's a serial entrepreneur, we walk away. Nothing against serial entrepreneurs. That's a great business to be in, but that's not what we're in. So we don't buy assets to flip them. We buy for a long term. We were one of the original investors in Tencent when they were pre-revenue. We bought 50%. We haven't sold one share to date. We don't intend to sell a share if anyone wants to ask that question. And they were pre-revenue, and we bought for $30 million, 50%, and everyone knows what their market cap is today. We were in very early with DST on Mail.ru and a couple of others. We continue to partner on a lot of things, and we continue to focus on emerging Europe. And no, Europe is not it's not the US. It's not the same all over the place, and it's all one language. So you have to approach it from a market-by-market perspective. And where we focus on emerging markets, emerging Europe, which is Eastern Europe, CE, CIS, Russia. We have the regions of LATAM, etc. But my responsibility is on Europe. There are some great entrepreneurs and some great teams. And people who want to build for the long term, for the next 10, 20 years. They don't want an exit check today, because it's the long-term sustainable value. And that's the philosophy we use, and that's how we invest.
Okay. So all three persons have talked about long-term entrepreneurial vision. So they all have evergreen structures, meaning they invest out of a company and not out of a fund. So is it becoming more difficult to invest out of a fund, Dharmash? And how do you see the European structural situation, and have you adopted your investment strategy?
So I think in terms of, is it more difficult? I guess, look, the heart of this debate around Europe versus US versus China is a debate about scale economics. And as Klaus outlined before, in terms of either creating a product or service which people build upon, which can scale, or having huge dominant market share in an individual territory which is large to create multi-billion-dollar businesses. And I guess the track record of Europe has not been great. There's been 6 or 7, maybe 8 in the past 10 years. And I think we've learned a lot from investments like Betfair, which is one of the kind of former in terms, or latter in terms of getting scale in a significant market and disrupting a particular industry. And we've learned from investments like Bebo and MySQL, which are much more infrastructure-based ones. And I think our view has increasingly kind of tended towards Klaus's thought. So if you want to invest in significant companies, then you need to think not only about great long-term entrepreneurs and teams, clearly not ones who want to exit on day 2, part of this debate, but also you need to think very carefully about each business and how it scales, because Europe is not one territory, it's an aggregation of different markets with different competitive dynamics. And I think what we found is we've probably been more careful about the kinds of investments we make and think much harder about how they scale. But also, increasingly, as we come up with great entrepreneurs and great ideas, we often move companies. So, for example, out of our 60 portfolio companies, probably 30 are based outside of Europe in the US or China now.
Okay. So now I shift to Harish, who is a real entrepreneur. Harish has built up several businesses in India and partly sold it to WPP or took them as a partner, and for an advertising network where he teamed up with Yahoo. So Harish, you didn't ever look outside India for exit markets or for teaming up with others. So you had an idea and you put it into motion, and describe a little bit the way how you approached that. And I'd be interested in learning how you then finally came up with the partners.
Thank you. Finally, from Israel, I'm back to India. So, no, I think the way I look at it, or my company looks at it, is that we've never gone out to raise money or to exit to anybody. It's always been our strategy has been more pull driven, because the way we understand that there's a huge amount of opportunity. And the gap that we see is that most of the, I would say, most of the people who are probably looking to exploit that opportunity do not really understand the local needs and the local challenges that exist, and probably are not very, very clued on to the market at an operating level. And that's where our model has been. So, it's been fast execution. I don't think I've ever gone out to raise money. We've always been approached, and even for the strategic partners, everyone wanted to buy us out. But as much it was important for the credibility of our portfolio companies and the teams that we're investing in, that we have big groups. But we wanted to stay on to the businesses, so we've not sold any business 100%, but we've got a good portfolio of good multinational partners. So I think it's kind of in between, we're the bridge between, I would say, global companies and the needs of the local market.
Did you look to the US or to Europe in getting the ideas that you finally realized, or was it a little bit more like driven out of yourself and the needs you saw for the market?
I think there's nothing wrong in looking at a good idea. At least that's what our belief has been. Though all the investments or all the companies that we founded are not purely the international model, because there are few opportunities which are very, very local. So I'll probably touch upon them as well. But I would first want to explain you the importance. Like McDonald's entered India, and if you go to US and imagine a McDonald's without a beef burger, there will be no McDonald's. And if India, McDonald's launches with a beef burger, the religious guys will throw them out. They'll be banned, right? And to be successful in India, McDonald's had to come up with a aloo tikki burger. Aloo is like potato, right? So the potato burger was like, which really worked for McDonald's. So it was the localization of the international model, which I think really, makes all the difference. Monster.com, I'm sure, does not employ 1,000 people in US, whereas the field force of Monster.com in India is 1,000 people. The Match.com, which is the big dating business in a lot of Western markets, would actually crashed in India. And the model in India was matrimony, So it's a social stigma to be seen as to be on a dating site in India, whereas if you call it as a matrimony site, it's the big business. So I think, for the global models, again, you need to localize them. And I personally think, from the investor side, there's very little, you see more American venture funds operating in India and very few European funds. I really don't know the reason why. But I would suggest that the big opportunity actually is in the local models, which are more for the middle class and the common man, and addressing more the infrastructure and e-commerce requirements of India. Because like India, e-commerce is assisted e-commerce. We are a country of 1.2 billion people and only 50 million online. So, and that also, even a regular middle class guy would have a maid and a driver and whatnot. So, e-commerce is also assisted. We are like too much assisted in everything that we do. So, the DIY model of e-commerce typically doesn't work in India.
Okay. So my takeaway a little bit is that we have seen some new models originating out of regions outside the US. So, and these have, for me, as a common denominator, a little bit that they tend to be a little bit more entrepreneurial than financially driven. So, like Harish built his little realm in India. The Zambas with Rocket Internet or European Internet Holding, they built up a big conglomerate. And also DST originally came out of a majority share in Mail.ru from two entrepreneurs that afterwards then mutated into investors. Everything has a little bit more an entrepreneurial approach. I'm wondering whether we just in Europe too blindly adopted a model that has been shown and developed in the US, and we play according to the rules of that model. Also, we have structural disadvantages. I think it's easier to play the model in the US if you have in a fund a very big hit. But if you are structurally disadvantaged, like here, and we don't have these big companies, does it make sense to play according to the same rules, or do we have to redefine the rules in order to take into consideration that we have a different structural setup? Dharmash, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think that's right. I think the rules of the game aren't necessarily the same when the structural boundaries are different in Europe, if that's the markets that you're going to play in. And as Harish said, Europe isn't just UK, France, and Germany. There are significant different markets which require deep cultural understanding and network to play in them. And I think, again, unfortunately, back to my previous answer, I think it does come down to really understanding kind of the scale economics of the kind of business you want to build. So, to some extent, do you need to adapt that business? And I think in many cases, people have been quite surprised starting a business in a particular territory, the level of adaptation required, sometimes completely rebuild that position competitively in another market. And this is classic of, say, content businesses, which classically need repurposing in very different ways. There's an element, a kind of second element of the kind of level of what I would call absorption in terms of scale economics, in terms of launching in an individual territory. How much infrastructure and talent do you need to get your leading market share? Is that in marketing? Is that in sales, etc.? And how advantaged are you to do that? Or are you starting again effectively? And then thirdly, there's this whole kind of question, which I guess we call absorption, which is all about to what extent, if you can build a scale business, can you actually outsource some of the cost structure elsewhere to get the scale economics, as opposed to having cost structure in many countries? So I think actually the level of complexity is significantly higher. And I think there are different models at play and different expectations of returns for different people at different stages in the game and different kind of fund cycles. So my kind of generic view is there's no one size fits all, but I suspect that the kind of Valley traditional model, very few people could execute.
So if we think about entrepreneurial building companies, at some point in time, the nature of the business changes and you have to become more process-driven. You have to have a completely set up than a startup. So teaming up with an industry player doesn't always need to mean you exit. I mean, Stefan has shown with teaming up with Holiday Check and with Elite Partner and also with Edjac, has proven to be very fair and promising to the development of these companies. Can you a little bit elaborate on how you do this? What are your expectations? And how do you finally support these companies when you team up with them?
Okay, probably the people we're looking for, the companies we buy in, we are really looking for individuals who really know internet. And we see many companies where actually if you talk to them, they haven't understood the backbone of internet. So this is the first thing, choose people who really have the knowledge. This is the first point. When we then step in and take a stake in the company, or we take majority, we don't see ourselves as major shareholder. So we have a highly decentralized system. I think this is the main big differences. I would say managing director of someone who sells to us is still an owner. And if you see the behavior, even against me, as if I'm in charge for the company, I discussed to him, it's very important for the founder to have the feeling that he's a founder. This is point number one, to give independence on the actual working. The second point is we introduce to them from the very beginning people who change, help them, and I think this is the core competence I see, which we bring with us. The competence you need to develop a company from a small startup to a very important player in one country in Europe, the competencies are very different. In the very first beginning, you have to build the platform, you have to get the team together. Once you start growing, the competitors see you, they attack you and everything. And if you scale on the national wide form, then you have to be very professional how you behave. And then comes the most important thing, and that is probably a thing, Klaus, which is also core in your question. Then you go internationalize, and not many companies, I think, you mentioned it, it's very difficult then to have the competencies to grow. And we bring in people from University of St. Gallen who have a lot of experience in going through those changes because there are many tech industry who already had that development. We give them a lot of coaching. The companies I'm in charge for, I telephone with them, I would say, at least 3 times a week. We work very closely together. We have a high trust among the team. And I think also lots of things we do, they feel that we don't want to take the value down, but to grow the value. For example, if we give them traffic, we have huge traffic, we don't charge them so much for that. So we drive with the traffic we have in our network, we drive that on their portals to grow them without any heavy limitation on the earn-out. They can scale if they want. And that we don't sue them the cost you have to pay at Google or other people who give you traffic in Germany. And so it's for us very important to work very trustful with them together. And finally, I have to say that once they reach national play, we actually realize that usually very professional new management teams are more successful. At Holiday Check, the founder, he's a great guy. I was last week with him in China looking for travel sites. We're together in the board, but he said, I think I did a fantastic job. I'm fine. I just want to do product development. And I now has a very professional guy coming in, and Jörg Trouvin just got in as CEO. And probably founders can drive companies to a national stage, but if it becomes international, which is the biggest challenge, you need someone who has done that before 2 or 3 times.
Okay. David, once again, if you look at the different sceneries and what can a European company do in order to get visible in the US, be it for exits or be it for strategic corporations or for developing the business? What recommendations can you give to the audience?
I mean, I'm a big believer that success begets success, and if you become a dominant player in your market, the U.S. investors, buyers will find you. Typically when we're working with U.S. strategics, they want to enter this market, they want to be dominant, and then when they're looking for partners, typically they will look at the top 3 players in the market. So if you shoot for the brass ring and you shoot for market dominance, I think the publicity will take care of itself and you will be identified. I think the lesson that I've learned the most in observing companies both in the U.S. and in Europe and in China, which kind of couples 2 of the points here, is that there's nothing wrong with being a copycat. Many great internet businesses were not the original creator of that particular market space. But if you want to challenge the incumbent in that market, you have to be really fast. You have to be a fast follower. And I think that what a lot of companies make this mistake. I think a lot of companies spend a lot of time on the back end, building great technology, but very little on the front end, very little on the marketing side. So how do we scale our technology so we can conquer, the European continent quickly before the American barbarians come over? And I think that's where a strategic partner can make a lot of sense. They've had the experience of competing in this market, getting a share of voice and mind share from customers, and I think that is an area where I would encourage more European internet companies to think about. Think about entering a market, but being a fast follower and becoming a dominant player in the top 3 as quickly as possible. And if it's with a strategic partner, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. So, in terms of shift of powers, my question to Alex, Chris, and Hein is, if you look like an horizon 5 years above, in front, so what do you see, what do you guess, who will the power shift to, and what would be the percentage allocations of different regions that you would invest in?
I think from DST perspective, we're pretty agnostic as to region, just because I think you find global leaders born almost everywhere, and you find companies that kind of like emerge. And Facebook sits in Palo Alto, but really it's a global company. 70% of the users are outside of the US. And so I think it's kind of finding these entities. I think you see, obviously, the rise of Asia or the rise of the rest outside of the US. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there in finding especially population-rich countries. We observe oftentimes that, what you see in your own little pond at home, and, we see it kind of like in Russia, some of these things actually apply on a global scale. And to what we were saying earlier on, when you see business models, it's really thinking, well, this works locally, this can work globally. And it's not only importing the US idea into Russia or into India or into Europe, it's kind of saying what works here and maybe this could work somewhere else as well, right? And so we've seen social networking as something which actually emerged at a much earlier stage of maturity of the internet in our regions. And then we took that on a global basis with the investment in Facebook. And I think we'll do more of that if we find something. For example, we're invested in the largest games company in Russia, MMO games. And we see that model actually works quite well, and we understand that model. We understand how people make money there. Well, there are interesting companies like that in Vietnam, for example, or other regions. And I think, if you're open-minded to the business model, the business opportunity, then it doesn't necessarily matter where the company originates from.
Chris?
At Horizons, we take everything on a case-by-case basis. So I think in terms of geography, very much like what Alex said, we'll be investing in various areas. I think in terms of where the growth will come, I think certainly if you look at Asia, it's very nascent in terms of its advertising, in terms of its online services. And again, a lot of it is driven by the mobile. So I think we'll see a lot of innovation there, and we'll see that gradually that there'll be more of a model of export from Asia to Europe and to America. And I think it will come in the form of services and more high-end goods. And I think the likes of, for instance, in China, Haier, Lenovo, that's the sort of maybe first wave of what will be this exchange with the rest of the world.
Hein, will it be more China or more Eastern Europe?
From a group perspective, I think we stick to our knitting, and that's emerging markets, and that's worldwide. So China remains, India remains, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. And speaking from a European perspective, between Eastern Europe, CE, CIS, and Russia, you've got 300-400 million people there. So it's not as if it's a small market to be investing in. But yeah, that's where we see our future. That's exactly where our core lies, and it's in all of the emerging markets worldwide.
Great. Harish, what will India look like in 4 years? Will there be an US invasion or a Chinese invasion, or do the Indians save their dominance?
It's a tough one. I think the US invasion is already there. So and Chinese, there is no Chinese invasion. But I think at this point of time, if you really look at digital, it's 400 million mobile users in India, and we're adding 10 million, 11 million every month. And internet is still 45, 50 million users. So I think the real inflection point is, probably, when we go past 100 million. And I think, there are a lot of regulatory issues which will probably prevent a complete foreign invasion. So, there are some regulatory protections. And I think, it's going to be a mix. It will not be purely dominated by Indian entrepreneurs alone. There will be a very big contribution from foreign investors and foreign partners there. But it will not be, it's not going to be either or. It's going to be a more collaborative thing.
Great. So I've 1 minute 40. So I tried to a little bit to conclude and also imply my wish list. On the one hand, I'm pretty strict on this structural disadvantage that we have in Europe. Yeah, but complaining is not only the option. So what I would like to do, and one reason for this lack of speed and this lack of size that we can do, I think it is in a lack of understanding of the mutual dependent worlds of VCs and angels and incumbents. I mean, the incumbents should look as the VC industry and as the angels as a financing department that finances projects which are important for the incumbents before the incumbents know. Yeah? So, and therefore it is a very important step that they do. And what I would like to do here is to say I'm open to have this discussion with the incumbents. We should engage closer with one another. And my wish list for the incumbents is be quicker, don't be complicated so much, be a little bit more generous in making mistakes because it's part of the equation. Yeah, and be easier again. Yeah, just to give you one example, I'm now trying to sell a company. Transaction value is in its mid of 7-digit number, and since the guy, it's a very big German company, and since the guy has fear to avoid a mistake, yeah, for this 5 million transaction, he has a team of 5 McKinsey guys for 5 months to analyze the deal. Yeah, so this drives everybody nuts. Yeah, the investor, the founder team. If you start like this, you will lose the founder immediately, no matter what earnout you have or not. So be a little bit more simple and try to work together on it and try to accelerate the businesses. Yeah, because I think it's worth it. And I'm happy to receive everybody's email at klaus@thomas.ch if everybody wants to talk about that topic. And so exactly at 0, I conclude, and thank you very much to my panelists that have taken great speeches.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Thanks.